Hi, thank you so much for very interesting presentation. So my first question would be also to Romero. The first one was that in principle, you advocate for a more economic view, and as for I understand, with these multiple layers of risk control, it would be more to formal apportionment, something like that. So for the and also create a new permanent establishment that also would need to develop some proxies as well. So how much you are satisfied with the current projects on that? So with Pillar 1, Pillar 2 on one hand, so I would say that they're not going to have a new permanent establishment. Indeed, it's a market jurisdiction in case of Pillar 1. And it's a bit different, indeed, but at the same time, it reallocates residual profits that we used to allocate mostly to risk function. And now market countries taking like some portion of residual profits. So what would be your view on how this framework actually should proceed with taking into account risk control framework, and also maybe some points to enhance this in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Svetlana. I mean, to make a long story short, I think that not all roads lead to Rome. We all want to go there, but not all roads lead there. What I think the entire initiative, you know, was aiming at is something very needed, very important, which is first getting to the right answer, but second, getting to consensus. Doesn't matter if you have the right answer that nobody agrees to, because then you have war. So to the extent that you can have consensus over whatever rule, you minimize the risk of double taxation, pluritaxation, etc., which is good. And you also minimize the risk of non-taxation. So from that perspective, I've always admired, very much supported the initiative. From a purely conceptual point of view, I don't like the approach because I think that the approach is another proxy. If I believe that we're attempting to tax income, business profits, I go back to the definitions of the treaty. If I say I'm trying to tax business profits, I'm not trying to tax trade, I'm not trying to tax consumption, even though a consumption tax and an income tax are two branches of the same tree, right, from a personal tax point of view. But if I step one degree away from the individual payer of the tax, and I go back into the scope of the business profits rule, which is what we've been talking about, I'm talking about the corporate tax, the corporate income tax. And if there's a withholding tax, it's an in lieu tax. It's a substitute for the corporate tax. So if I'm in that world, which is not the same world as the world of VAT and individual personal income taxes, then I think that the route taken was technically not the best. Why? Because the proxy chosen for business profits, which is the location of the consumer, might be a proxy for a certain portion of normal profits, but I am not convinced that it is a great proxy for residual profits. And at the same time, to get to use that proxy, you end up using a formula, and that formula might deviate from the principle. So it might become just what I believe has become, negotiation. So if you have a principle debate, are we trying to come up with a proxy to the arm's length principle? If we say yes, then negotiations are framed and guided. It's not about who wins and loses. It's about trying to get to the best possible or the second best possible answer for everybody. So in a game theoretical sense, when you're principled, it's easier to resolve the dilemma. When you go back to the situation where we just know we want to tax and we elected this proxy, which is consumer location, because it makes sense in the world of data, blah, blah, blah. But if we say that the proxy is there and the political will to tax is also there, but there's no principle in terms of how to define the base, then you go back to the world of CCCTB or whatever. It's what is the formula? How are we going to divide it? What is the rate? So you end up, in a world of bargaining. In a world of bargaining, it's much harder to do in a game with so many players. So if you have 3, 4, 5 players, maybe you get there with just bargaining. If you have 27, like in Europe, maybe you don't. But if you have the inclusive framework, very difficult. And then perhaps you end up getting somewhere just for the sake of having achieved something, and it's too high level, and you end up having disaggregated interpretations and answers nonetheless. But the point is that if you do all of that, and you do that by choosing a proxy and having the will to tax, but not being sure that that proxy is a good proxy for business profits, what you might end up doing, you might be creating a consumption tax, period. So this is the concern that I have with respect to Pillar 1, is that if you don't develop it in a bit more principled way or in a deeper way, you may end up with it simply as a quasi VAT dressed up as a business profits tax to appease the public. Whereas in Pillar 2, the global minimum tax, etc., it started off, in my view, as a bit more principled, because it was, okay, let's fill Action 3. So let's, CFC didn't solve it. Let's come up with something else which solves it at the top. So the top-up tax. When we were in the world of the top-up tax and the threat of, if you don't do a top-up tax, somebody else will, then maybe we would get to coherence also for those rules. It's not transfer pricing, it's not risk allocation, but we would get perhaps to a good answer for CFC. Now, if we deviate from that path and we end up in a world where there's different kinds of rights to countries that may not be base eroded over residual profits. So the under-tax payments rule, now it's just an under-tax rule. It's no longer under-tax payments rule. So if you move away from the payments nexus to jurisdictions, you end up in the world of politics again. So I'm a bit disappointed, I will say, in how the whole initiative developed. I love the way it started. I love the goals. I admire the effort, but the way that it's materializing right now in the last stretch, in the very end, to me, it's becoming too political and not principled enough. And then again, not consistent with what I think risk allocation and business profits should be. So I'll stop there. Otherwise,
thank you so much. I mean, it is. I'd love to have some lectures from you, Romero. So